Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm assuming you can all hear me. You're all little squares on the screen. So um yeah, okay, the thumbs up indicates you can. I assume we've all probably got a certain level of Zoom fatigue because over the past 2, 3 months we've had to use this more than the past however many years. At least I know I have. But I think what I do enjoy, like whenever these kind of video calls or video meetings or whatever um seem like it's for work, or when it is for work, it just seems like super exhausting. And I always leave each one feeling very tired and regretful that I joined it. But whenever it's for anything creative, it feels more uplifting and more positive and really, really good. So hopefully this will be like that as well. Like I said previously, thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to Own It, who've organized an amazing um, week-long digital literary festival, which has featured so many amazing writers who are part of like the Own It family. Um, and yeah, it's really kept like the heartbeat of, you know, publishing and literature alive in this kind of obscure time, especially this week, because this week has just been, I don't know, like you couldn't make it up. It's just, I'm still processing everything that's been happening this week. But I think in kind of like in the storm of everything that's going on in the world right now, that I find that at least for me anyway, like stories and stuff, art helps us to understand and find some kind of hope in it all. So hopefully this will do this as well. Before we get into it, I wanted us to have a bit of a reflection. Obviously, today is the 14th of June, and it marks exactly 3 years since the Grenfell fire tragedy happened. Um, and I'm sure, most of us, if not all of us, would have been thinking about that already today. I think it would help to kind of uh, do that as a mark of remembrance to start today. So if we could have a minute of, I don't like to call it a minute silence, but more so a minute of reflection and compassion. And in that minute, we just think about the people who lost their lives, their friends and families, but also our own friends and families. Um, and we have to hold value of the people we have in our lives too. So yeah, 1 minute's time. Okay, thank you everyone. Yeah, so no place to call home 3 years on. Um, I wanted to I wanted to do this with especially Ona who published the book. Hopefully, if you've read it, that's absolutely brilliant. If you haven't, that means that you've got a new book to read, and that's something on the reading list, which is also great. But it's been such a whirlwind of a story. Like I can't even. I mean, the past 3 years has just been has gone so fast, firstly, that it doesn't even feel like 3 years. It could all just happen in the last like year or so, year and a half. But how the story came to be, how the book came to be, the novel came to be, like a lot of that story isn't really known. And also like just in terms of like the publishing industry and how everything works there, the writing journey, I think writing is one of those arts that's probably like, you know, very obscure. People don't really know what you do and how it works. And you know, neither did I. And I'm still learning even in this kind of journey. But there was so much that I didn't know and didn't understand when it came to the point of this book being published and also this story as well. And so we just kind of go into that, and then hopefully at the end I'll be able to kind of present something new. And yeah, I'll tell you about that when the time comes. But how I wanted to go was just going to be me talking a little bit about No Place to Call Home, about the publishing journey, and about kind of my own experience. And then kind of I'll open up if you've got any questions, any suggestions, anything that you, I don't know, want asking, anything that we're trying to figure out in terms of the book, whatever it is, feel free to ask. For those of you who may not have seen, like, this is it, No Place to Call Home. And honestly, just like even looking at it, I'm just, I don't know, I still struggle to express my emotions when it comes to this book because it's just been such a beautiful story. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. And yeah, so like for me, you know, writing, I'd never thought writing a book was something that I could do, especially as someone who wasn't particularly spotted out through my kind of educational formation as being gifted in any way in terms of like writing, especially if you get a D in your English literature A level. You know, you think the last thing that you could do well is write. But around about, I started writing poetry unknowingly, right, when I was kind of like in uni, finishing uni. And I didn't really know that I was writing poetry. I'd never been to an open mic. I'd never even really heard of an open mic apart from one of those like funny 90s movies, you know, those Love Jones type movies. And they're corny for some, but they're romantic for others. But, you know, it kind of depends. But you never really think that that's going to be your life. Like, yeah, so I started writing poetry, and then my friend took me to the first open mic and was like, yeah, you noticed that I'd been writing some stuff. I said, yeah, go read your poem. And I remember reading this poem and I was so shook, absolutely scared. And it's this love poem, it's really corny as well, super corny. I actually hate it now. Like, and not in a bad way, because like, you know, when a piece of writing just you feel like you've outgrown it. Yeah, like that. And I feel like I've outgrown that immensely. But looking back, I still have fond memories of it. And then, so that was about 2009, maybe. So this has been a while. And then I just kind of like went through ups and downs, not really knowing what I was doing. 2010, 2011, 2012, still writing a few poems here or there, but just trying to figure out what it is that I'm trying to do in life, because I had no idea. Asterix, I still low-key have no idea, but I think I have a bit more of an idea now. And then it got to about 2012 or 13, and people were like, oh, where can I read your stuff? Blah, blah, blah. And I started this little blog where I'd write my poems, but people wanted physical copies. And, you know, at this point, I thought, all right, let me see how this works. So I tried to email some publishers and stuff from a Hotmail account I had back then. I don't even know if I'll ever be able to find those emails actually, but like I got some blunt replies, and I was like, right, okay. But what I'm seeing when I go to open mics and stuff is that people want to read my stuff, but then there's loads of publishers who are like, no, this isn't, you know, the right material, blah, blah, saying all this kind of stuff. I was like, all right, cool. So I started I self-published little thin paper pamphlet type book thing called Elevate, which some of you might know about or even have, which would surprise me immensely because I don't even have it. And then, like, yeah, people would buy that. And I was like, well, right, people are actually interested. But I never really believed in myself. And then fast forward a few years, I get to the point where, like, and I think this was probably the biggest, I guess, shift that I had in terms of me and my own personal story, personal journey into writing. Like, I was working at a school around 2015, and I really enjoyed the job, like, loved it. But like, I loved working with kids and stuff. But when something just eats away at your soul, and it was really, really difficult to sustain myself in that. And I was like, I have to leave this place. Like, I don't know what, I don't have a plan. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to leave. So I decided to go. I had a friend in San Francisco who I was talking quite closely with, and they were like, "Oh, you know what? If you need some time to figure out stuff, just come and stay here for a bit. I think you really like the city." So I went, stayed with them, quit my job, and then was out there. And then whilst I was there, like, in my head, I was just like, I need to write the story. I don't know what, but I knew it wasn't going to be um, poetry, right? So I started writing this story, and I had no idea how to start a novel. Like, I had former attempts trying, but I didn't know what I was doing. So what I did was I looked at like, my friend had a kind of a mini library type thing, and one night I went through the first page of every book that they had, even the first chapter, every book that they had, just to figure out how to start a book. And I still didn't know. But then eventually, like, I started writing something and all of that, and it just started coming out. And then I got a random email from Pontus Agency, who now represent me. Like, "Oh, we've seen your stuff online. Think you're really interested, and interesting, and we'd like to represent you. But we don't represent just poetry. Like, have you thought about writing a novel?" And I was like, "Wow, this is perfect timing." So yeah, and I said to them, I'm currently working on something, but I'm not quite sure. And they said, "Look, let's just discuss and we'll see where we go." So I come back to the UK, thankfully, because listen, America out there, that's a whole other story. But it really opened my eyes. Coming back to the UK, and I was like, right, I've got something substantial now. And they said, "Yo, we really like this. Can you finish it?" And I was just like, someone wants to write, that wants me to write a novel. So I just worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And then it got to the point where, like, fast forward, the book is finished, and we're now trying to submit it to publishers, and we send it to literally, like, everyone you can think of, major publishers, indie publishers, like, whoever. And the thing that my agent said to me was, firstly, like, go for the person who most believes in the story and is most passionate. So for any, like, most passionate about the story and passionate about you and what you believe in, because that's how my agency operates. Like, and this was around 2016. So, that was when, like, the Black Lives Matter protests, especially in the UK, had gathered, like, massive momentum. And it was almost like a new wave of the conversation of police brutality and racism happening. And I was really conflicted, like, because I'd always been told, "Oh, you shouldn't talk so much about that," because that's something that I've always spoken about. I've literally been told by so many people, "Talk about that, it's gonna, take away your opportunities," all of this kind of stuff. And I was like, "Nah, man, I believe in this, so I'm gonna talk about it." And luckily, Pontus felt the same. Yeah, so we sent it to so many publishers, and some of the responses were, oh, like, literally telling me, "Oh, we love the story, but we've just got a refugee story," or "We've just signed our diverse writer," or "We love the story, but we just don't feel like it's going to be something that people are interested in. We're just unsure. We just don't really love it." clearly he's talented, but you just don't really love it. And I'm just like, that doesn't make sense because, you know, if you thought someone was talented and or it's a great story, then surely that would be enough. But obviously, you know, with hindsight, we understand that that's not how it always works. And then there were a few who were really interested. And then like Crystal came along from Own It. And like I remember our first meeting, and you know when just someone says exactly like what you're thinking in terms of what you want to do with it, and her passion and enthusiasm and hard work was like absolutely unmatched. So like I had no hesitation going with them, and then that's how it like wound up being this, you know. Um, and with it, it's a story of uh, a refugee family that come from Congo to the UK, and it looks at it from the perspective of the young boy Jean and the dad Papa and the family and community as well, and the kind of issues that they face. And I didn't want to make it anything sensationalist or anything dramatic with what refugee stories from Congo can be or war stories from Congo can be. Literally all my life, whenever I've spoken to anyone and I've told them I'm from Congo, the first thing they mention is war. So to me, it was like pointless to just write a war story, you know, because that doesn't serve the humanity of the people that I know and come from. That's always been the thing that I've been most kind of attached to in understanding the story. So yeah, and on that note, I'm gonna show you some pictures, right? So hopefully this will you'll get to see what I mean when I say why you really have to think about ways in which you're representing people when you write a particular story, because I think art has the ability, or you know, to humanize us and to make us feel seen in ways that other things don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to screen share. Give me 1 second. You know when you're still trying to figure out. Right, man, don't know how to screen share, you know. Um, hold on, I've done it before. Right. Nope, that's me stopping my video. Uh, right, I must be confusing myself. Okay, all right, so I'm not gonna try and figure that out. I don't know what's happened here. Um, oh, okay, I can't seem to screen share. But okay, so basically, what I was gonna screen share was, or maybe you know what, I'll post it on the socials later. Yeah, so just so you get a sense of like what I was trying to say. But basically, it's like what it's for me. I've always really been interested in the history of like Congo and Africa generally. And in our family photo album, we've got all these pictures of like my parents in this in the 70s hanging out with friends, like drinking or whatever. Um, you know, them at concerts, like us when we first came into the country. And all of these memories were always like really happy memories. And so I wanted to write a story that reflected that experience, like the experience of these eccentric human beings that I've known all my life, and not one that just regurgitates the story of war and conflict and trauma, which is something that we all the time. And that was also one of the things that we was told when we were submitting it to publishers. Was one publisher in particular from a really big house, and was like, "Oh, this is a story from Congo, but it doesn't read like a story from Congo." You know, and I was like, if I'm a Congolese writer writing about Congolese people who come from Congo, isn't that a story about Congo in itself? Like, And then what they were trying to implicitly say is that basically, like, where's the trauma? Where's the tragedy? You know, and my thing is always like not to dwell on that. That can't be the basis of the story. At least for me, I don't know for other writers, but for me, I'm always like, well, where's the humanity? You know, like for us, if you look at right now, we're all living under a certain set of like very unique circumstances that could be seen as traumatic. But in our day-to-day lives, like we're navigating it in a slightly different way. You know what I'm saying? Like we worry about very regular things. Like, am I going to be able to, you know, do the bed today? Or I need to clean my room, or I need to make some food, or I'm hungry. Do you know what I'm saying? Or even, you know, relationships, dating, and family, and all of this. So that was always like the emphasis for me. And so that's how we came to bring this about. And Crystal was just perfect. And then one of the beautiful things about this story was we got such an amazing response, because it wasn't something that was necessarily picked up by the big media houses or anything like that. And although it didn't win any awards like that, it was something that wherever we went, like it always connected with people. We did so many festivals, Womad Festival, Cheltenham Literature Festival. Like we did the Literary Crossroads Festival in Lagos, Writervism in Uganda. Like we went to India. Like we literally, I mean, the book went everywhere, right? And I always got so many different emails from people from different cultures from around the world, from Japan to like Bulgaria, people saying, yo, love this book, like, can you come out here and all of this? And I'm like, right, there's people in Bulgaria who are saying that they love this book, or people in Japan are saying they love this book. But then like here, where it's set in the UK, you know, there's almost like this, I know people looking the other way almost. And but that only made me more resolved in necessity, like telling the story. One of my absolute favorite memories of this, of kind of this journey in terms of writing, was when I met a very famous writer, a very, very famous writer at a nightclub in Barcelona. And they were telling me about, I can't say who obviously, but they were telling me, you know, I went up to them and was trying to talk to them and tell them about my book and all of this, but like that's not what they were on. They were very much kind of like being the lad, and that was like hilarious. So I was thinking like I never imagined that the story would get to this point. And then one of the most touching moments as well was when, like, you know, my parents read it, my dad read it, people and elders in the community read it, and were just like amazed that this story exists, because these were like such a wide number of people who came, you know, under such difficult circumstances and never imagined themselves being accepted, let alone their stories being in a bookstore, you know, in a public bookstore, something that they can pass on to their kids. And I've done like so many workshops with young people at secondary schools, young Congolese kids as well, who absolutely love the story because they related to it, but also kids from different backgrounds and cultures. And I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to storytelling, is that we relate to things as we see ourselves. And too often we've let that, like we've assumed that the basis that we see ourselves in is through a singular lens of either race or ethnicity or sexuality or whatever. Like representation is across the board, and we need those. And you see each other as you see yourself as well, and that's like in the sense of like being a human being. And I'm not trying to say that in a way to like erase those our identities. In fact, like it's more so in a way that helps us understand our collective identities and bring them together. And then also there was this book, Refuge, which was published in 2019, I want to say. No, 2019? 2018? Wait, hold on. You know when your brain is just not working? Yeah, 2018. I cannot believe it. Yeah, 2018. And this has, I want to read this poem um, from it. This is a collection of poetry that I've written, like over the years, some old and some new. And this has a poem called Refuge, which essentially highlights the refugee experience. Yeah, I'll read it and then come back to the conversation, and we can have a little, be like Q&A, if anyone wants to. Imagine how it feels to be chased out of home, to have your grip ripped, loosened from your fingertips, something you so dearly held onto. Like a lover's hand that slips when pulled away, you are always reaching. My father would speak of home, reaching. Speaking of familiar faces, the girl next door would eventually grow up to be my mother, the fruit seller at the market, the lonely man at the top of the road who nobody spoke to, and our house at the bottom of the street, lit up by a single flickering lamp where beyond was only darkness. There, they would sit and tell stories of monsters that lurked and came only at night, to catch the children who sat and listened to stories of monsters that lurked. This is how they lived. Each memory buried, an artifact left to be discovered by archaeologists, the last words on a dying family member's lips. This was sacred. Not even monsters could taint it. But there were monsters that came during the day, monsters that tore families apart with their giant hands and fingers that slept on triggers. The sound of gunshots ripping through the sky became familiar like the tapping of rainfall on a windowsill. Monsters that would kill and hide behind speeches, suits, and tires. Monsters that would chase families away, forcing them to leave everything behind. I remember when we first stepped off the plane. Everything was foreign, unfamiliar, uninviting. Even the air in my lungs left me short of breath. We came here to find refuge. They called us refugees. We hid ourselves in their language until we sounded just like them, changed the way we dressed to look just like them, made this our home until we lived just like them and began to speak of familiar faces. The girl next door would eventually grow up to be a mother, the fruit seller at the market, the lonely man at the top of the road who nobody spoke to, and our house at the bottom of the street, lit up by a single flickering lamp to keep away the darkness. There, we would sit and watch police that lurked and came only at night. The rest, the youths who sat and watched police that lurked, this is how we lived. I remember one day I heard them say to me, they come here to take our jobs. They need to go back to where they came from, not knowing that I was one of the ones who came. I told them that a refugee is simply someone who is trying to make a home. So next time, when you go home, tuck your children in and kiss your families good night. Be glad that the monsters never came for you in their suits and ties, never came for you in the newspapers with the media lies, never came for you. You are not despised. And know that deep inside the hearts of each and every one of us, we are all always reaching for a place. And yeah, so that poem, man, that poem came about. Thank you. That poem came about in from a really tense situation. So I wrote that years ago, but it was at work. And can you imagine? Like this was amongst teachers. And the conversation of refugees and immigration came up. And a few of them were like, yeah, there's too many of them. You know, they need to go back to where they came from. And I was shocked. Because these were, you know, people who I considered colleagues as well as friends in a very diverse school in London, where we had a significant number of people and students who were kind of facing challenging immigration issues. And so in the heat of that moment, I did respond, and they were quite like taken aback and apologized because they didn't know my story. And then I thought that like it's so important, and that's what actually led me to write this poem, and then like go on to work with like the United Nations High Council for Refugees and kind of raise awareness about this issue, because like the the plight continues. And if you think about what's going on right now terms of COVID-19, in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of like police brutality and racism and anti-racist movement. Like within that intersection, the life of refugees is also compounded by all of these things and makes that circumstance even more difficult. Can you imagine, like back in the day, we feared going to the hospital or going to the GP, or if we needed to call the police for anything. Like we just feared to do that because that meant that our safety was compromised because we could get deported. Like we knew people who were just deported, like just like that. And then if you look at that in terms of what's happening now, especially like the Windrush generation, you see like the hostile, quote unquote, hostile environment has always been hostile for many people. And I think that's something that we don't really, we didn't really get to see. And so for me, as someone like who grew up in that, that's why I feel like this story was so important, because people really need to understand that there was such a great nuance to these experiences, but also that there's so much more that we lose out on when we don't get to hear these stories. Yeah, so it's been a really, really incredible journey. And there's more to come as well. So later on, at the end of this talk, I'm going to share something that I've been working on. But yeah, in the meantime, if anyone's got any questions, anything that they'd want to say, any questions of, I don't know, about writing, anything specifically, or about the story itself, because there was some, I did get some emails about the story in terms of like how it, without spoiling it, how it may or may not end, which is probably the most controversial thing, which I absolutely loved. But yeah, I really appreciate you lot for listening. Yeah, if you've got any story, if you've got any questions, by all means, just yeah, I don't know how it works. Just let me know. Come up and ask. I think you can raise your hand or just unmute yourselves and just ask a question straight up. That would be cool, and that would also mean that I'm hearing my own voice less. Yeah, let me see if anyone's got any questions. Okay, so there's a question in the chat from Chop. Are you noticing a difference in the types of stories that publishers are willing to publish now? Okay, so are you noticing a difference in the types of stories that publishers are willing to publish now? So what's been an absolute revelation in this past couple of weeks is obviously the Black Lives Matter movement started specifically about police brutality and essentially abolishing the police and, inequality in society. And then that started off as a specific issue, and then it branched out, kind of making a demand on different organizations and so forth to make a stance in terms of where they are and what they believe in. And this also was reflected in the publishing industry and the need for transparency as well. And so there was a hashtag called Publishing Paid Me, which was largely like something that was shared amongst like the US demographic and US publishers and writers as well. Not publishers, but writers who were essentially like revealing the salary or the advances disparity between Black and minority writers versus white writers. And I think the most outrageous, if you check the hashtag Publishing Paid Me, you see it for yourself because it should still be up. But one of the most outrageous sums was I saw a relatively very unknown writer who had been given an advance of $800,000. $800,000 for their book. And he did about it, for one book. And he basically said that did not even come remotely close to selling that many copies back. And there were so many different examples of that. And I think the most surprising thing for me was just seeing how many writers were able to get huge advances, but then also fail, not sell, and then continue to get another huge advance and new advance and have a career. Whereas like as a Black or minority writer, you're always like really worried about whether or not you're going to make sales. And so that being brought out now in the being highlighted, like over the past few years, we're really seeing a lot more stories that are focusing on kind of books from Black writers and minority writers, but they tend to be books that focus still on quite serious issues, which I think are necessary. But also I'd love to see a lot more kind of like commercial and light-hearted books as well. And I'd like to see something get like equal representation and support across the board. There's so many writers who do get published, but they have to work incredibly hard, like Black writers who have to work incredibly hard to do the legwork for themselves and promote their own book. Like I always say, for me, I don't think I'd be published if I didn't have social media. Like if I didn't have the social media presence that I happen to have. And that's only because like I tweeted like a madman. I just tweet all the time. But also like there were so many people that I connected with. And then one of the things that I got told was like, oh, you don't know if poets can write novels. There's kind of like that controversy, which controversy at all. But also it was like, even still after No Place to Call Home was published, we have to still do so much of our own legwork, so much of our own promotion. And it's only because we are able to do things independently as an independent artist and as an independent publisher that we were able to reach the audience that we did reach. And that, we had so many good links and connects with independent bookshops and stuff, and people actually going out. So yeah, but now that's starting to change. And I think, and let's see what happens in this kind of era. And my thing is whether or not it's sustained. Now, I don't really mind for my own personal self. Like, my thing is like, okay, so what does it mean for the next kid who's on an estate somewhere who wants to be a writer? Like, how do they get into it? Do they have to go through what I went through to get to where like I've gotten? And I haven't even really got anywhere. Like, I'm not better. Like, I haven't won the book. I haven't won any significant prizes. So yeah, hopefully we're starting to see that change. There's a few more questions coming in. I clocked that you lot are all shy today, maybe because it's a Sunday and you lot are in bed and just chilling, and you're actually making me do the hard work and you're not switching the cameras, but it's cool. Yeah, if you got any questions, drop them in the chat and I'll just go through them. Another question from S. Lusak. Have recent events, Black Lives Matter, coronavirus, influenced how you approach your artistic practice as a writer, and if so, how? That's a great question. So when, I feel like for me, writing is processing, right? So how I make sense of the world, I use writing to help me make sense of the world and to help me kind of find my empathy and compassion as well. And I think everything that's happened, like initially, was quite a like shock. So, I think so many of us went through a real period of like shock and just like, what is going on? And then after, trying to write our way to understanding the situation and understanding how it's impacting us as well. But for me, I think the thing that's probably changed my approach most is I've really tried to take better care of myself, like every single day. It's a much more concerted effort. And I'm thinking a lot more about how to sustain myself, thinking a lot more about how I can live wholly and truly in the long term. And really just appreciating that, like, we are alive, and just how special that is. And that was something that I, always kind of like believed in. But I think when the situations that is going on right now come much closer to you, you really really feel that, you know, and that helps you to appreciate not just the fact that you can create art, meaningful art, and leave a legacy, but also that you have the people who are in your lives that you do love and you want to connect and share with them. So yeah. Question from Charlotte. Orpheus, shout out Charlotte. What are you reading right now, and what are you working on? Okay, what am I reading right now? So I'm currently reading Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, late to the journey, but really, really interesting reading that. I really like the writing style and the stories that's been told in terms of the structure. It's very different to the books that I've read or even would write necessarily, but she's amazing. Like, to be able to bring together such a collection of stories. And also Bernardine has been someone who's championed like so many writers, helped so many writers for decades, and so she definitely deserves all the success that she's seeing now. And what are you working on? What am I working on? Okay, I'll leave that question to the end, because hopefully I'll get to share something a little bit later. All right, but yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Appreciate your question. Question from Amanda. I'll read that out. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, JJ and Own It, for this. I'll shout out to you, Amanda. I'd like to ask, in your opinion, what is the role of fiction in a much needed, more diverse and inclusive school curriculum? I think fiction helps not just young people, but everyone develop empathy, to come out of their own individual singular experience of whatever identity it might be, whether that might be on racial terms or gender terms or whatever, but also to go into other people's lived reality. One thing that none of us seem to understand, well, rather two things, right? None of us chose to be here. We do not will ourselves into existence. We don't control which bodies we were born into, or families, or state, or whatever we were born into. And none of us can really control how long we're here for. And I think the necessity of literature, art generally, but also literature, reminds us of those two facts. And, you know, those are two facts that absolutely rid us of the sense of ego and arrogance and entitlement. Yeah, so I think that's why it's important for young people to be able to read that, and to be able to read diverse stories that go beyond their, stories that reflect their experience, but also go beyond their experience as well. So as much as like, yeah, we're in the UK, UK is a majority white country. Like, I want to read stories from white working class people. You know what I mean? Like, I want to read those stories, but we shouldn't be limited to those stories. Be limited to those stories neither, because it renders them a disservice. You know, and I think about some of the stories that I've read and connected to, like, it expands your world so much more. And so that's why I think it's important for that, to be a part of the curriculum. And you can see what happens when it isn't. You know, if we look at yesterday's events, like, you can really see what happens when people aren't exposed to a broader experience of life and humanity. So yeah, that's why I think it's important. Yeah, thanks for the question. There's a few. The cameras were locked off. Oh, the cameras are locked off. Oh gosh. Okay, so it's just me. All right, my bad. All right, Connor's got a question on the ending of No Place to Call Home. Can you talk about why you wrote the ending the way you did without spoiling it for those who haven't read it? All right. Right, so on the ending of No Place to Call Home, can you talk about why you wrote the ending the way you did without spoiling it for those who haven't read it? How do I talk about the ending without giving it away? Okay, so for those of you who have read it, the ending ends in the way that it does because, for me, I felt that if I went in one direction or another direction, it would have been too conclusive, right? And for me, I wanted people to live with that frustration, the frustration that that ending brings out. If that makes sense. That frustration is an everyday lived reality. And so for me, when I was thinking about writing the ending and the way, because I wrote multiple endings for it, and each one didn't feel right until I wrote the ending that I wrote. And when I got there, and I was like, this is it. And bear in mind, I don't like the ending. Like, it's not an ending that I enjoy. As a reader, that is not an ending that I would like to read. But when I think about what's important, what's necessary for telling the story, and or how a story will stay with someone, I felt like that was the only way that I could have ended the story, because that tension, that palpable sense of like frustration, it lingers, and that's an ongoing thing. And whether, you know, the story is set in the 90s, and that's when most 90s, early 2000s, so that's when most of that happened. But even now, you know, we're 2020, that same ending still applies. You know, that same situation still applies. So I wanted to more so reflect the continuity of situations rather than, you know, providing a conclusive or definitive statement. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But I can guarantee that I will not end another book in that way at all, because that would just be torture. It was torture enough for me. Okay, but yeah, thanks for the question, Carla. Mansell says the cameras were locked off. Oh, is that okay? So I don't know how. I'm not even okay. Hopefully they're on now. But yeah, if you want to switch your camera on or whatever, feel free to do that. If you want to speak, also feel free to do that. I don't know if, because I'm not controlling none of this, so yeah, it's beyond me. I'm just speaking into it. All right, cool. There's fully deep conditioning. Yeah, so I know you lot are doing multiple things at the same time. I wish I could be deep conditioning my beard as well. Thank you for the brilliant answer. Nice one, Amanda. I appreciate you. Sarah asks, Lisa, apart from your own life experience, what have been the biggest influences on your writing? Other writers, I mean, there's so many writers, whether it's like, and poets. And I do love poets. Like, I think poets like David J, who have just been, like, you know, when you read a poem, you hear a poem and it makes you cry, like literally, or one of my favorite poets, Anish Moscani, who's an American Iranian poet, Black American Iranian poet. He's just incredible, you know, and I think that I always say that I'm as much a fan of poetry, of literature, as I am a writer, you know, and if I didn't write or when I stopped writing, I'm definitely going to be a fan. Like, I'm going to be a hype man. I absolutely still am. You know, there's writers who I just absolutely love to hype. And if I find or connect with a piece of work, like, I'm always trying to share it, you know, whether that's in friendships or whatever. So yeah, I guess I'll probably maybe share some stuff on social media about specific writers who I've probably enjoyed a lot more than others. But I would say one of my favorite are probably a name writer, Ayi Amar. He's right. If I could write like anyone, I would write like him, but I can't, so I'm not going to try. Okay, so message from Own It. If you haven't read, you can get both these books. So usually, No Place to Call Home, I had to remember the title there. No Place to Call Home is a tenner, and Refuge, I think, is about £8. So, but together, you can get them together for £15 discount. Yeah, so if you want to order, go to ownit.london. The link is there use the discount price code JJ Zoom Online Fest. Hopefully that will, yeah, if you want to read it. Shout out to you, Con. I appreciate that question. Okay. All right, wicked. So if anyone hasn't got any more questions, I'm gonna, yeah, Charlotte, I'm gonna reply to your question about what I'm working on, I'm currently working on. So, all right, cool. So this, I don't know if technically I don't know if I'm actually like allowed to share this, but this is between us. I do have some I do have some news that's gonna come out in the next kind of like week or so. Bring it. I'm a bit nervous to say this because I'm not like told anyone really. But yeah, got some news that's going to be coming out over the next week or so. I'm not quite sure when, but I have been working on my second novel, and yeah, it's gonna be. Oh, someone's gonna. Yes, man, still got your camera on. Shout out to you. Yeah, I've been working on my second novel. Been working on it for a long time. And yeah, there's going to be an announcement in the time to come. Well, I guess like over the next few weeks or whatever, maybe even next week. I'm not quite sure. But what I wanted to do was to read the first chapter and maybe tell you about it. So, all right. So this is between us. Firstly, yeah, you can't tell anyone because I don't even know if I can tell anyone, but you know, I'm risking it. So like, don't go and tweet it or whatever. I don't know if people would do that, but yeah, it's not like it's a big exclusive, like or whatever. I'm not at that stage yet. But yeah, so my second novel is complete. I've been working on it for the past 3-4 years. Started it really close to when I finished No Place to Call Home. And it was one of those ones that, you know, like for artists, especially like writers and musicians, for writers it's called the curse of the second novel, where apparently after you write your first one, it takes you a really long time to be able to figure out what you want to write for the second one. But yeah, this one kind of came quite quickly to me. I knew exactly what I wanted to write, but it was the writing it that took a long time. And bear in mind, I also work full time, or have been working full time and on and off or whatever throughout the past few years. So it's been a really, really long time coming, but I'm really, really glad, like, to say the least. Very excited that it's got here. The title is, so this is just like, not it, this is just a print out version, but it's called, I don't know if you can see that, it's called The Selfless Act of Breathing. And yeah, The Selfless Act of Breathing. And it's a story about a young man who kind of goes on a life journey trying to figure out what his experiences are and what he's going through. And if you lot don't mind, I'd like to just read the first chapter. And then, yeah, I don't know if we're gonna have questions or whatever, but yeah, I'll just share this with you. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, I'm very nervous, you know. All right, chapter one. Chapter one. London Heathrow Airport, Terminal 2, 9 a.m. I quit my job. I'm taking my life savings, $9,021, and when it runs out, I'm going to kill myself. The flight is in 1 hour. He left with more than enough time to get there, yet somehow it was lost. Hesitation, fear, anxiety. Bodies pass him in every direction. He stands still, looks up to the board to find the checking. He sees a young blonde-haired mother carrying her child in her arms. Behind them is a tall man, eyes closed, earphones in, hair tied in locks, carrying a backpack and a guitar, wearing harem pants, looking as though he is going on an adventure to find himself. Two pilots and a quartet of flight attendants glide through in coordinated steps, emanating a glow as if the path beneath them is lit up, and two lovers with matching stonewashed jeans, delicately in each other's arms. He rushes over to the queue, 9:15 a.m. He reaches the front and passes his burgundy red passport to the lady at the counter. This passport, a thing hoped for, a blessing, a prayer, can save a life, can make a life, can take a life too. This passport, split between red and blue, between land and sea, between hope and despair. This passport, without it, I have no place to call. Good morning, sir, she says, and flashes her per-hour smile. He mumbles a greeting, tapping his fingers on the desk. Michael Kabongo. What is your destination, sir? San Francisco. He types into the keyboard with a blank expression. She calls her colleague, who has already checked in 3 customers in this time. They both stare at the screen diligently. What's going on? Michael says, palpable frustration. I'm sorry, sir, the other colleague says, her heavily made-up face, contoured nose, lips painted a burgundy wine, distracting him. We can't seem to find your booking. That's wrong. I booked this flight myself. My name is definitely there. I can't miss this flight. Look again, he calls out, raising his voice and flailing his arms, pointing, drawing attention. They look up at him, ignoring his light outbursts, then at each other. I do apologize, sir. You're at the wrong check-in. You need to go to... His heart thuds as her voice fades out. He watches the direction she points in. He grabs his passport back, 9:20 a.m. His lungs tighten and breath shortens as he runs through the crowd. He feels too hot for this brisk autumn morning. His skin boils under his coat. His scarf suffocates him. He starts to sweat. He is at the back of the long S-shaped queue, 9:22 a.m. He bobs up and down on his toes with the same kind of urgency as a child bursting to be. He mumbles under his breath, prompting others to look at him with suspicion. Someone at the front of the queue is loud, meandering, making conversation, being friendly, wasting time. Hurry up, old man, Michael shouts. I can't go back. I can't miss this flight. Is there anyone in the queue for the flight to San Francisco International? A man's voice floats through the air. Michael quickly comes forward, and so does a woman waiting a few places behind him in the queue, her face the same picture of relief as his. They are brought to the front. The man with brunette hair behind the check-in counter takes his passport and types into the computer. Any luggage to check in? He places his traveler's backpack onto the scale. Traveling light, the man says, smiling, which Michael does not respond to. You're all checked in, sir, but you have to be fast. The plane will be boarding very soon. Please make your way across to airport security as fast as you can. Michael is running once again. He arrives at security and sees a swarm of people waiting as if queuing to enter a football stadium. He paces up and down, trying to find a way to the front. He sees a customer assistant letting people through 2 at a time. Please, he implores. My flight is at 10 o'clock. I have to go through now. She looks at his boarding pass and quickly lets him through. 9:35. The boarding gate closes 15 minutes before the flight. I have 10 minutes left. His legs tighten, shaking, hands cramping up. He drops his passport and boarding pass on the floor and fumbles, trying to pick them up. He rapidly takes off his jacket and scarf, belt, satchel, everything out of his pockets and throws them onto a tray. 9:39 a.m. Michael goes through the metal detector and the alarm bleeps. The security officer rushes towards him, looks down at his feet, and tells him to take off his boots and go back. He returns and tries to untangle the laces of his boots, which are strapped up to the ankle, twisted and curled like vines around a tree. He undoes them and rushes through the metal detectors. The security officer waves him on. He grabs his possessions and runs once again, running, always running. Gate 13, 9:43. 9:44. Michael is running through duty-free, each step a stomp heavy enough to leave its footprint through the door. 9:45. He sees gate 13 up ahead in the distance. 9:46. He arrives at the gate. There is no one there. He falls onto his knees, panting. What a fucking waste. Maybe taking a loan out for this money wasn't a good idea after all. Maybe none of this was meant to be. And in between a mouthful of expletives, a woman appears from behind the desk and quiets his ranting. Boarding pass, sir. Michael hands her his boarding pass and clutches his chest. Just in time, sir. Please take a breath and make your way through. Thank you, he replies, repetitively, overflowing with gratitude. Michael walked through the plane door and is met with the smiling faces of the flight attendants. Smiles back at them. It is meant to be. He walks past the business and first class flyers who don't look up at him, into the economy area to his seat by the window. He sits beside a man whose belly is struggling against the seatbelt and a woman who has already medicated herself halfway to sleep. He collapses onto the seat and feels a calmness settle within him. The sun hanging on a distant horizon. This is the beginning of the end. So, yeah, that's the first chapter of the next one to come. Glad I got that one off my chest because I was nervous, but yeah, wow, thank you guys. I'm nervous. How did it feel reading it for the first time? Yeah, it felt really exciting and nerve-wracking. I've never been so nervous. Honestly, I don't know. And probably because it's been such a long time and we're doing it in a different way. You know, because obviously I'm more used to, we're all more used to being in the same room when it comes to these kind of things. But yeah, and also, you know, I remember where I was when I first started writing this. And that was 3 or 4 years ago in the British Library. And yeah, I never thought this, I never imagined this, and I didn't know how it would look like when I read it to people. But yeah, that's the first chapter of the story. And you know, more of it goes on, it's set, obviously starts off in London, and goes to different places and goes on quite a journey. So yeah, that's the next one to come. Really, really excited about that. Obviously it won't be, well, I mean, there's still announcements to be made and stuff, and things are being finalized. But yeah, thank you guys for allowing me to share this with you. I feel really, really like privileged to be able to do that, and I'm really glad that, you know, you enjoyed it. Some of you are saying it was awesome to hear, thrilling. So yeah, I'm really, really excited. Really, really excited to share that with you. I don't know if anyone has any kind of like final questions or anything that you want to mention, but it's all been really, really amazing. I'm also doing an Insta Live tonight, Instagram Live at 8 o'clock. That's going to be more kind of maybe me reading poems, just having a chat, a lot more kind of laid back and chilled. But yeah, I hope you've all really enjoyed this. Yeah. Oh, Master, you got a question? Yeah. Yeah, please. I want to hear someone else's voice.
Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
Yeah, good, man. Thank you for doing this, man. This is awesome.
Oh, thank you. It's good to see you as well.
Likewise. As you can see,
we're all looking rough.
But yeah, my question for you is, I know this is kind of like a little bit of like a question that everyone kind of asks, but how do you cope with writer's block and how do you get out of it?
What was that? How do I cope with what was the first one?
How do you cope with writers and how do you get out of it? Writer's block.
Writer's block. All right, cool. So for me, when especially like at the earlier stage of my writing journey, writer's block was really something that affected, right? And it felt very real. And, you know, it stopped me from even being able to really write anything because what it wasn't so much the block, it was what the block represented, right? And for me, the block was that The block was the lack of self-belief, a lack of confidence, lack of clarity in my own voice, and not really understanding what I was doing. Like a combination of other things as well, but it was largely those. And it was those things that actually set up what I believe to be, and I think what we generally believe to be a writer's block. So when it came to me trying to write anything, it was like, oh, it's not good enough. You know, this, that, and the third. I'm not good enough. I'm not meant to do this, whatever it was. And then I got to a point where, like, you know, and there's also another part I missed out, which is the waiting for inspiration. There was this thing about inspiration that having to come from somewhere, right? I'm not inspired enough. I'm not motivated. I think motivation and inspiration are like closely linked, but you could be inspired and not motivated. You could be motivated and not inspired. And then I just shifted the way that I saw about it. I saw writer's block, and I just basically chose to not believe. So I really think, like, I believe in the power of our imagination and the power of our minds, right? And we, especially as artists, whatever we believe to be true is going to reinforce it, right? And so writer's block is absolutely the same. So for me, I got rid of the idea of writer's block, and I started to believe more in editing, right? So it's better if you have words, it's better to have the words and then edit them and get rid of what you don't need than to not have the words at all. The writer's block is you not having the words at all, right? But actually editing means that you just write. Like, don't worry about whether or not it's good. Don't worry about whether or not, you know, you're good enough or what people are going to think and all of that. I say that not because it's an easy thing to say. It's just difficult to get through that. I still worry about that. You know what I'm saying? But at the writing process, when you're at the start of whatever, just put whatever it is to pen and paper. And if it is rubbish, like, you can figure that out when it comes to the editing stage. Like, there's lots of stuff, and I say writing is work. Like, it's like bricklaying. Do you know what I mean? It's labor. It's so labor intensive. For everything I share, like, it, you know, it's like that iceberg thing, right? The iceberg analogy, where the tip of the iceberg is what you see. Like, that's the story. The majority of it is the stuff that I don't share. And a lot of that is not good. I tell you this is what I always say. Like, if I can guarantee you, if I can write, like, we can write the unedited first chapter of No Place to Call Home, or first draft, unedited of No Place to Call Home, is trash. I like say this, like, unequivocally, it's trash. Yeah, but it's through editing, revising, rereading, all of that, that actually allows you to create what is now known as, like, that tip of the iceberg. It allows you to see the final product, you know. And so that's what I would say when it comes to writers. It's like, stop mentioning it. Like, I stopped mentioning it for myself. I only mention it in relation to if I get asked about it, to try and help other people kind of like overcome it and stuff. But for me, I don't even think about it. I write. If it's good, great. If it's not, I don't know. Like, I don't even think about it. I just get it on paper, get it on paper. And then eventually when it comes to the end, I look back and I'm like, okay, what am I trying to say here? Do I need this? No. Do I need that? Oh, no. Oh, but this is good. Okay, so I'm going to hold on to this sentence. And then eventually it all just starts to come together. You know what I'm saying? And I think the illusion often, and also, like, I think that us writers, we have to be a bit honest as well in terms of, like, the work that we put out there. Because the illusion is often that the book that you see is almost like what they wrote the first time. It's never that. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's never that. You know, because it is, that's just not how the industry works. That's not how the art form works. And so, like, if we all rest comfortably with the fact that when it's not reflection of your art to create something perfect the first time, or even what is perfect generally, like, that's an obscure thing itself. For me, I try to look at it in terms of, like, empathy, you know, and authenticity. Like, can you connect with what is on the page? Are you connecting with it? Are other people connecting with it? You know, and I think for me, I would choose empathy and authenticity over perfection in any art, any day. So yeah, just go for it. And if it's trash, that's good. You know, it's kind of like basketball, right? You have to shoot to be a better shooter. Like, you can't not shoot to be a better shooter, right? Like if like there's the quote, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And it's the same thing that applies to writing. You know, you're missing out on the poems and the stories and all of that you need to bring out into the world if you constantly tell yourself that you're not good enough. And that voice of you telling yourself you're not good enough, you have to really interrogate whether that's your own voice or whether that's that's an internalized outside voice from society, from friends, from parents, from school teachers, whatever. And I say this not into a way like to denigrate or to talk negatively about people, but some of the closest people in my life have been like, a writer? What? You? Man, what are you doing? Nah, man. You know, and I'm like, no, I really want to do this. Like, I really think I can do this. You know, like, and I love her, but I'll say like my mum, for example, when I first started writing and doing this poetry thing, she was like, what are you doing? Like, or what are you doing? You know what I mean? Absolutely love the woman. But, you know, she didn't get it. And then now she's like, oh, my son's a writer, my son's a writer. You know, shout out Mumsy, obviously I wouldn't be here without her. But it's kind of like you have to find a way to transcend all of that and just focus on the art. And then that's the job that you have. You know, but out there, what I always say, whether it reaches the masses or whether it reaches at one person, like, you're changing someone's life. You know, there's been times where like at one person has been me, and that piece of art that someone created has reached me, and I'm like, yo, I don't know how I would be without this, you know? So I feel like it's our responsibility to put it out there, especially now more than ever in terms of everything that's going on in the world. So yeah, man, appreciate your question, appreciate you, and hopefully, yeah, that helps as well. But yeah, you lot, man, thank you for listening. I don't know if anyone else has got any more questions or anything like that, but really appreciate everyone tuning in and listening and taking it all in, and putting up with my voice. Yeah, so I'm gonna do an Insta live later on this evening at 8 o'clock. So if you've got a bit of time, feel free to join me there. But yeah, take care of yourselves, stay safe, spread love. All right.